Alright, so I've been meaning to make this video in a while. It's been a couple months, so people should be used to the iPhone X's notch by now. And we have a slow drip of new Android phones that are gonna come out soon to have their own notches and their own design as well. So let's check out that notch though. Yeah, so I'm talking about this notch and these notch, not that notch. Yeah, he's cool, but we're not talking about him. Let's start off by agreeing that the notch is not a pretty thing. It's not an aesthetic design choice, but a compromise. When it was unveiled with the iPhone X, an understandably vocal group of people were taken aback by it, because it was a pretty noticeable wrinkle on a pretty seamless looking phone. But I don't want you to think that Apple was the first to do this. Let's take a walk down memory lane. Motorola's Moto 360, remember that? Yeah, that smartwatch was a compromise on design as well. It was, in my opinion, one of the best looking Android Wear smartwatches available, but it also had a notch, not on top, on the bottom. At the time, people called it the flat tire design. It houses the proximity and ambient light sensors in order to keep track and manage the display brightness and when to turn on the display when you look at it. Motorola lovingly called it the shelf, by the way. At this point, even big manufacturers like Samsung have rolled out advertisements officially making fun of the notch, and pretty blatantly too. Tell me if you guys can see where the joke is. Alright, so Apple's notch was a necessary evil. At the moment, we cannot embed the cameras and sensors under the display. And there is a significant amount of technology that has been so painstakingly miniaturized to fit inside this incredibly small space. And this is important to realize that the notch, which is used to implement Face ID, that notch that Apple has to rely on is functional. There's a purpose to it. It's not just done for the sake of being done. Also, before we get too far into talking about notches, I just think it's very important to note that there are other ways you can approach this as a company in terms of design as well. The Essential phone, unfortunately some people tend to forget this, the Essential phone was the first phone to have that notch with the display wrapping all around the camera module on top. See, instead of doing what Samsung does and having a very thin forehead and a very thin chin, they wrapped all the way across the front of the phone itself. And their goal was to give as much screen real estate as possible while making sure that there was still space for the camera, making that notch functional. There wasn't any excess black room for no reason. Because right now, with our current technology, there's no other way to put a camera on your phone without having to take up space. Where things change, however, is when the iPhone came out. Now, not too long after the iPhone X was released, I'm talking about just a couple months here, or maybe a month or two, you had some manufacturers such as Liaogo, Noah, and Vinci that copied the notch and incorporated it into the design. But that was almost kind of expected. But what happened that kind of changed the game was that ASUS, a reputable, more higher end in the scale of low budget Android phones to high budget Android phones, started incorporating the notch as well in their Zenfone 5. And this right here is the acknowledgement that the notch wasn't just going to be a low end copy feature, but it's going to start moving up the pipe all the way into your mid-tier phones, and eventually we might see in our high-tier phones a little bit down the road, of course. And then there are the rumors of the Huawei P20. It's showing off a notch, a noticeably smaller notch by the way as compared to the iPhones and the Zenfone, but it's up there on top. Since both the Zenfone and the P20 will most likely have the notch, you have to ask yourself, what's the point? Why cut out that space? Well, when you look at it, you're not actually putting Face ID on it, because on the back of those phones, you still have a fingerprint reader. Admittedly, in an interview, they're just copying the design. They're just copying the trends. This is ASUS and Huawei blatantly trying to copy Apple and hoping that their phones in the wild will get confused for an iPhone. And they both know that the best they can amount to is to be mistaken for an iPhone. Now, I can live with the notch. I'm not saying it's a necessarily super bad thing, but I think the notch has to serve a purpose. If you're putting it there just to be there, then what's your defense? And now officially, Android P, the next iteration of Android, is going to have native display cutout support. See, that's fancy talk for notch support. I personally like the S9's approach. If you're not going to put advanced biometrics in order to scan your face to unlock, you might as well just use the thin forehead and thin chin. It would do wonders to how the phone looks and feel. But hey, this is going to be a great experiment actually. We get to see in the next year or year and a half whether or not manufacturers who copy the iPhone see an uptick of sales just because there was a notch. I mean, I'm already talking about it because they're copying it. And then eventually when it translates into hard sales and we can compare the numbers, we get to see if certain phones within the same price range perform better if there is a notch. And we get to compare and contrast whether or not this was good for the market. Thanks for watching What the Tech. If you liked what you saw, give a like. If you really liked it, give a sub. And go ahead and share with me your opinion on the whole notch situation. I personally understand why it's there, and the notch makes sense to me because we're using it as a replacement to Touch ID. But what do you think about fake notches or having a notch when there's already a fingerprint sensor behind the phone? Alright, so until next time, peace.